Uh, Welcome, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm also really scared. um, I'm thrilled because I love today's readings. I really do. They're some of my favorite passages, but I find them perplexing. I find them perplexing because they don't affirm my the thing that I believe the most, which is that God is love. And I believe that, but in these passages that we read today, it's not quite clear that God is love. We'll see. But I find these two passages perplexing. Pastor Sue, I think, has offered some brilliant ideas about the difficulties of Mark over the past few weeks. So I thought I might start today by telling you what I find surprising and confounding about the book of Job. As many of you know this well, right? Job is filled with this breathtaking poetry of the kind that Susanna just read, thank you. But it opens with this kind of fairy tale-like prose. There once was a man, a blameless and upright Job. And then Satan suggests to God that Job is this way only because he has it easy in life. So, with God's permission, Satan unleashes misfortune after misfortune on poor Job. He loses everything. When he refuses to curse God for these sorrows, Satan strikes Job with a grievous burning rash. The book then moves into a series of poetic speeches that are very famous. Job decries the calamities that have befallen him. And his friends tell him that he's probably suffering some sort of punishment for sins that he's committed. Job knows he is innocent, however, and he ruminates about what seems to be a troubling injustice in his situation. Job says, God destroys both the blameless and the wicked. It's chapter 9, verse 22. So Job suffers, but not as punishment for any sin that he's committed. He seems to want to know why. What have I done to deserve this? After many speeches, finally, in chapter 38, the Lord finally speaks in the passage that we heard, but he doesn't answer any of Job's questions. None. Job gets no answers, and the Lord offers no comfort in this passage, or no apparent comfort in this passage. Instead, he seems a little ticked off, right? A little stormy, if you will. He reminds everyone instead of the sublime awesomeness of his creation. It's like, oh, you're suffering so much, too bad. Look at this cool thing I made. You know, he just changes the topic, and there doesn't seem to be any caring or compassion or comfort here. Why? Our typical ideas of the Creator seem to be that our beloved Creator, that they are benevolent and caring and just. But why no justice for Job? The Lord doesn't seem to have any of those qualities in these passages. Why? I have three thoughts. One of them is kind of obvious, but I forget it all the time. Anyway, here are my three thoughts. The first one is this. The passage is probably suggesting that suffering is not always just. The good suffer unjustly sometimes, and there isn't always a clear or comforting explanation. Now, such an interpretation seems at odds with, say, the clarity of Proverbs. Misfortune pursues sinners, but prosperity rewards the righteous. That's Proverbs 13:21. But we know that there are good, kind, righteous people who suffer for reasons beyond any choices that they've ever made. It's not fair, and it's not right. But we see it all the time, right? If you're like Job, you might wonder sometimes, well, what am I supposed to do when I'm faced with this suffering and injustice? The answer that the story seems to give is just this. Be like Job. Be faithful to the divine, to God, to his creation, to the divine within you. Turn away from evil. That's chapter 1, verse 1. Say prayers for others. That's chapter 1, verse 5. Focus on what is up to us which is usually only a decision about what is the next right thing to do. Such actions don't prevent evil or adversity or suffering. Bad stuff continues to happen to good people. So we just do what we can do. We accept that the world is full of beauty and pain, and this beauty and this pain are not predictably distributed according to some reliable algorithm or to our own human understanding of justice or righteousness. Here's my second thought. The Lord's speech from the whirlwind might also be a reminder that sometimes we need a new perspective on things, that the change of topic is deliberate on the Lord's part. Throughout most of the Lord's two speeches in Job, he invites us to stand in awe of creation, which, like I said, can seem like an abrupt change of topic. Instead of vindicating Job as requested, the Lord asked Job to look at the world. Creation, the morning stars singing together, the sea bursting from the womb in the passage that Susanna read, the clouds and thick darkness, the proud waves. It continues on like this for 3 more chapters as the Lord shows us the recesses of the deep, the gates of death, the origins of, ready? Snow, hail, rain, thunder and lightning, wind, dew, frost, drought and ice, lions, mountain goats, deer, wild donkeys, wild oxen, ostriches, hawks, and eagles. When he talks about the eagles after the hunt and talks about their babies, he tells us, quote, their chicks lap up the blood. Then, as if to save the best or worst for last, he urges us to gaze upon the behemoth and then the mighty Leviathan, who is so glorious and so fearful that when the Leviathan raises itself up, the gods are afraid. The Lord paints a picture here of the natural world that is stunning and majestic and beautiful and painful and violent and frightening. Why does Job need this reminder now? Like, he's down. It might be another reality check. Suffering happens to good people. It's not fair. Likewise, let's just remember that the eagles nurture their babies by killing prey so those young ones can lap up the blood. In other words, the natural order teems with violence and death and dying. And these moments of violence and suffering are tiny blips in the space and time of our planet, which happens to be just one of the many planetary bodies circling our one modestly sized sun, which is just one of 200 billion trillion stars in the known universe. In our 13.8 billion-year-old universe. So why, again, is the Lord offering Job this kind of divine or cosmological perspective on his vast, violent, seemingly chaotic universe? Well, from God's perspective, I think, in this story, Job's moment of doubt and pain is a twinkling within a vast expanse of time and space. It is also only a moment in Job's own very long life. According to the book's ending, Job lives another 140 years. But the point is, everything changes. And in our suffering, I think it's wise to remember the words of this country song from about 12 years ago. Every storm runs out of rain. Do you remember that song? It's a great quote. Every storm runs out of rain. The fans are like, I know that song, yeah. This doesn't mean life is fair. It doesn't mean the pain doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean the misery isn't intense. It doesn't mean that the seas or our leviathans aren't scary. They are. It just means the world is big, the universe is bigger, time long, and things are going to change. For the better, for the worse, maybe for the better again. But what happens isn't always up to us. So, one more time, what are we supposed to do with this God-sized perspective? Again, I think the story's answer is something like, be like Job. Focus on what is up to us, what we can do the next right thing, say a little prayer for others in your lives, Be grateful for our family and our friends, even if they're lousy theologians and worse therapists. Be as faithful as we can. That's what Job does. And if we can't, when our faith is small or we don't know what to do next, be like the disciples. Cry out. Jesus calms the storm. The disciples lack faith, and they don't understand Jesus in Mark. I mean, it's one of the most interesting aspects of Mark. But it doesn't matter. He still saves them. Be like the disciples. Call to Jesus for rescue from the storms. Okay, here's my third, and this is obvious, and I apologize for it, but it took me 2 weeks to get to this. My obvious but forgotten realization is that God is with us. And I think that's what these passages are saying. The wisdom of the Bible is often this kind of paradoxical anti-wisdom. In the words of Paul, a foolishness to the world, but a salvation to those of us who need it. In the opening book of the Hebrew Bible, for instance, we learn that the children of Israel are going to become God's chosen people. Hurrah! And their subsequent history is enslavement and suffering and oppression. It turns out it's not all that pleasant or easy to be God's chosen people. Likewise, in the Gospels, particularly Mark, Jesus is portrayed over and over as this anguished Son of Man who must undergo suffering, Mark 8, be treated with contempt, Mark 9, and die, Mark 9, Mark 10. He tells his followers that they will have it hard too. If any wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Or, as he puts it in John, succinctly, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you too. Being chosen by God or following Jesus never, ever meant smooth sailing. It meant being with God. So, because of his suffering, Job gets to talk to God. If you read the Bible, there aren't a lot of people that get a back and forth conversation with Yahweh. Job gets one. Despite the panic they feel in the storm, despite the reprimand they get from Jesus for lacking faith, despite the new fear they feel after he calms the storm, one of the translations, a hyper-literal translation, David Bentley Hart's, says that after Jesus calms the storm, the disciples are afraid, enormously afraid. So despite their fear, despite being reprimanded, the disciples get to be with Jesus. The introverted Jesus of Mark, he's always forever leaving the big crowds, the multitudes, to get some sleep, to get some peace. He takes a nap in the boat, right? But he keeps his disciples with him. He teaches these baffling parables, as Pastor Sue described last week, but he explained everything in private to his disciples, Mark 4:34. Though they don't often get it still. Nevertheless, despite the storms, despite their cluelessness, the disciples get to walk and talk with Jesus. So these passages reminded me this week that this is where we find God, in the storms, in the trial, in the pain. I'm certain he is with us in our joys as well, but maybe we notice less well. Then I'm not sure, I don't know. But as these passages suggest, God talks to us in the storms. Jesus is in the boat with us. It is in those storms